in the far reaches of Nebraska's Panhandle, where the interstate becomes a forgotten two-lane highway and the horizon stretches unbroken in all directions, there stands a place that maps refuse to acknowledge. Local postal workers know it only as rural Route 47, a designation that leads nowhere and serves no one. The road itself peters out into gravel, then dirt, then nothing at all, leaving travelers to wonder if they have somehow taken a wrong turn into a landscape that time has abandoned. It is here, in this expanse of tall grass and wind-carved earth, that one finds the Crowley Circle. 23 stones, each carved by hand from Nebraska limestone, arranged in perfect symmetry around a patch of ground where nothing has grown for nearly a century. The stones themselves bear no dates, no epitaphs, no conventional markers of remembrance. Instead, each bears a single name, carved in the same careful script: Margaret Crowley, born 1847; Elizabeth Crowley, born 1869; Sarah Crowley, born 1891. The pattern continues, methodical as a metronome, each name representing a daughter born precisely 22 years after the last. The final stone, weathered but still legible, reads simply, "The hollow remain." Local ranchers avoid the circle, claiming their cattle refuse to graze within a half-mile radius. The few who have ventured close report a peculiar phenomenon: the complete absence of sound. No wind whistles through the grass, no insects chirp. Even the ubiquitous Nebraska meadowlarks fall silent as they approach. Photographers who have attempted to document the site report consistent equipment failures, cameras malfunction, film emerges overexposed, and digital sensors record only darkness. Where the stones should be, the Nebraska Historical Society maintains no records of the Crowley Circle. The United States Geological Survey has no topographical data for the area. It exists, as so many uncomfortable truths do, in the spaces between official acknowledgement and lived experience. Yet the stones remain, patient and permanent, waiting for someone to piece together their meaning. To understand the Crowley Circle, one must first understand the peculiar history of the American frontier in the 1930s, when the convergence of economic desperation and environmental catastrophe created conditions ripe for the emergence of movements that promised salvation through sacrifice. The Dust Bowl had transformed the heartland into a wasteland of failed crops and foreclosed farms. Entire communities packed their belongings and fled westward, leaving behind ghost towns that dotted the landscape like abandoned shells of a discarded way of life. It was into this environment of despair that Jeremiah Crowley arrived in the spring of 1934, appearing in the small town of Millbrook, Nebraska, as if materialized from the dust itself. Contemporary accounts describe him as a man of remarkable presence, tall, lean, with prematurely white hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths beyond his apparent age. He wore a simple black suit that never seemed to accumulate dust, despite the perpetual dirt storms that plagued the region. His hands, those who met him recalled, were unusually pale and cold to the touch, as if he had spent his entire life in darkness. Crowley spoke with the authority of a man who had witnessed great truths, and his message was simple. The drought was not a natural phenomenon, but a punishment for humanity's abandonment of older, deeper covenants with the land. He claimed to possess knowledge of rituals that could restore the earth's fertility, but these rituals required a community willing to surrender their individual desires for the greater good. Those who joined him, he promised, would never again know want or suffering. The initial response to Crowley's preaching was skeptical. The people of Millbrook had endured their share of traveling evangelists and snake oil salesmen, but as the weeks passed, something began to change. The small group of followers who had gathered around Crowley reported strange but welcome phenomena. Their wells, dry for months, began to produce clear, cold water. Their gardens, planted in the same barren soil that had failed every other farmer in the county, sprouted with an abundance that defied explanation. Most remarkably, a gentle rain began to fall on their property each evening at sunset, lasting exactly 1 hour and touching only the land owned by Crowley's adherents. Word spread, as word always does in small communities. Desperate farmers and their families began to attend Crowley's evening gatherings. held in the abandoned Millbrook schoolhouse. The schoolhouse itself was a testament to the region's decline, a one-room structure built during more prosperous times, now empty of children and slowly surrendering to the elements. Crowley had cleaned it meticulously, removing all traces of its former purpose save for a single piece of chalk writing that remained on the blackboard. The hollow men are we. Those who attended these gatherings described them as unlike any religious service they had previously experienced. Crowley spoke not of salvation in the afterlife, but of transformation in the present. He taught that suffering was caused by the human tendency to cling to individual identity, to the false notion that each person was separate from the land and from each other. True peace, he argued, came through the willing dissolution of the self into something greater and more enduring. The ritual practices Crowley introduced were subtle at first. Followers were asked to spend 1 hour each day in silent meditation, focusing on their breath until they could feel their heartbeats synchronize with the rhythm of the earth. They were instructed to eat only foods grown in the local soil and to drink only water drawn from the community wells. Most significantly, they were asked to gradually relinquish their personal possessions, donating them to a common storehouse managed by Crowley himself. As summer progressed, the contrast between Crowley's followers and the rest of Millbrook became increasingly stark. While the broader community continued to struggle with drought and economic hardship, those who had joined Crowley's circle appeared to thrive. Their crops grew with impossible vigor. Their livestock remained healthy despite the harsh conditions. Their children, who had been listless and undernourished, regained their vitality and began to display unusual intelligence and composure. Yet there were troubling signs for those who chose to look closely. The followers' behavior became increasingly uniform. They spoke in similar cadences, using identical phrases and expressions. Their facial expressions grew more limited, settling into a kind of serene blankness that some found peaceful and others found deeply unsettling. Most disturbing was their relationship to pain and discomfort. When injured, they showed no reaction. When faced with loss or disappointment, they displayed no grief. They had, it seemed, transcended the emotional volatility that plagued ordinary humanity. Dr. Edmund Fitzgerald, a physician who had served the Millbrook community for over 2 decades, was among the first to document these changes systematically. His journal, discovered decades later in the basement of the town's demolished medical clinic, provides a clinical perspective on the transformation of Crowley's followers. His entries from the summer of 1934 describe patients who no longer responded to pain stimuli, whose pulse and breathing patterns had become unnaturally regular, and whose blood, when tested, showed cellular structures he had never encountered in his years of practice. Most disturbing was Dr. Fitzgerald's account of examining the children in Crowley's group. They appeared healthy, even robust, but their development had ceased entirely. Children who had been growing normally before joining the community remained exactly the same height and weight for months. Their teeth stopped growing. Their hair, when cut, did not regrow. It was as if they had been suspended in time, frozen at the moment of their transformation. Dr. Fitzgerald's journal entries become increasingly frantic as the summer progressed. He describes failed attempts to interest state health authorities in investigating the community, frustrated by officials who viewed his reports as the products of a man driven to paranoia by the stresses of the Depression. His final entry, dated September 15, 1934, reads simply, "They are no longer human. God help us all." The doctor's body was found 3 days later in his office, apparently dead of a heart attack. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest brought on by malnutrition and stress. However, the coroner's report, filed away in county records and forgotten until much later, noted several anomalies. Dr. Fitzgerald's body showed no signs of decomposition, despite having been dead for an estimated 72 hours. His eyes had turned completely white, with no visible iris or pupil. Most disturbingly, his heart, when examined, was found to be completely absent from his chest cavity, leaving only a hollow space where the organ should have been. The investigation into Dr. Fitzgerald's death was perfunctory. The local sheriff, a man named Thomas Brennan, conducted a brief interview with Crowley and several of his followers. In his official report, Sheriff Brennan noted that the members of Crowley's community expressed appropriate sadness at the doctor's death but seemed unable to provide any useful information. About his final days, they spoke in the same measured, emotionless tone that had become their trademark, describing Dr. Fitzgerald's death as part of the natural order and a necessary transition. What Sheriff Brennan did not include in his official report, but confided to his personal diary, was his growing unease with the community's behavior. He wrote of their uncanny ability to anticipate his questions before he asked them, their tendency to finish each other's sentences, and their complete lack of the nervous energy that typically accompanied police interviews. Most memorably, he described their eyes as looking through me rather than at me, as if I were made of glass. The sheriff's investigation was cut short by a more pressing concern: the announcement that Crowley's community would be hosting a harvest festival to celebrate their remarkable success in the face of the region's agricultural collapse. The festival was scheduled for the autumn equinox, September 23, 1934, and would be open to all members of the broader Millbrook community. Crowley extended the invitation personally, appearing at the courthouse in his characteristic black suit and speaking to Sheriff Brennan with the same measured cadence that had become familiar to those who encountered his followers. The invitation was remarkable not only for its timing, but for its content. Crowley promised that the festival would demonstrate the true power of community cooperation and spiritual transformation. He hinted at revelations that would forever change the understanding of humanity's relationship with the land. Most tantalizing, he suggested that those who attended would witness the final ritual that would make the community's prosperity permanent and eternal. Word of the festival spread rapidly through the drought-stricken region. Families who had been struggling to survive for months began to speak of attending, drawn by reports of the community's miraculous abundance. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Herald, ran a brief article announcing the event, describing it as a celebration of successful farming techniques developed by local resident Jeremiah Crowley. The article made no mention of the community's unusual behavior or the mysterious circumstances surrounding Dr. Fitzgerald's death. As the date of the festival approached, strange phenomena began to manifest throughout the broader Millbrook area. Residents reported vivid dreams in which they found themselves walking through endless corridors of carved stone, following the sound of voices that seemed to come from underground. Children began to speak in their sleep, reciting strings of numbers and letters that made no apparent sense. Most disturbing were the reports of livestock behaving erratically, cattle gathering in perfect circles, chickens laying eggs with shells that seemed to pulse with their own internal light, and dogs refusing to bark or make any sound at all. The only person who seemed immune to these phenomena was Margaret Brennan, the sheriff's 17-year-old daughter. Unlike others in the community, she experienced no strange dreams and showed no inclination to attend the festival. Instead, she began to experience what she described as waking visions moments, when she could see the true nature of Crowley's followers. In these visions, she saw them not as the serene, healthy individuals they appeared to be, but as empty shells animated by something that was definitely not human. Margaret's visions intensified as the festival date approached. She began to see the community's children not as living beings, but as carefully constructed dolls, moving with mechanical precision, but lacking any spark of genuine life. The adults appeared to her as hollow figures, their bodies present, but their souls absent, replaced by something that watched the world through borrowed eyes. Most terrifying were her visions of Crowley himself, whom she saw as a figure of shifting shadows and impossible geometry, a presence that existed partially in the physical world and partially in spaces that defied human comprehension. Desperate to warn others, Margaret attempted to share her visions with her father and other community members. Her warnings were dismissed as the imaginings of a young woman driven to hysteria by the region's hardships. Even her father, who had expressed private concerns about Crowley's community, refused to take her visions seriously. The collective anticipation for the festival had reached a fever pitch, and the promise of witnessing a solution to their troubles overrode any concerns about the community's unusual characteristics. The festival began at sunset on September 23, 1934. With the arrival of nearly 200 people from throughout the region, they came in wagons and old automobiles, carrying their families and their hopes for a better future. The site of the festival was a large field adjacent to the abandoned schoolhouse, now transformed into something resembling a country fair. Tables laden with food stretched across the grass, displaying an abundance that seemed impossible given the region's agricultural failures. Fruits and vegetables of remarkable size and quality were arranged alongside fresh bread, dairy products, and cuts of meat that appeared to have been prepared by skilled butchers. The members of Crowley's community served as hosts, moving among the visitors with the same serene efficiency they displayed in all their activities. They spoke little, but when they did, their words carried a hypnotic quality that seemed to calm the anxiety and desperation that had driven people to attend. Children who had been crying from hunger fell silent and began to eat with methodical precision. Adults who had been tense with worry found themselves relaxing, their concerns fading into a pleasant haze of contentment. As the evening progressed, the festival took on an increasingly ritualistic character. The visitors were gradually guided to form a large circle round the field, with Crowley's followers interspersed among them. Crowley himself stood at the center, his white hair gleaming in the light of numerous torches that had been arranged around the perimeter. He began to speak, his voice carrying clearly across the field despite the apparent impossibility of addressing such a large gathering without amplification. Crowley's speech was unlike anything the visitors had heard before. He spoke of the illusion of individual identity, the false comfort of personal attachment, and the liberation that came through surrendering one's separate existence to a greater collective consciousness. He described the Earth as a living entity that had been wounded by humanity's refusal to acknowledge its true nature. The drought, the economic collapse, the social upheaval of the era all were symptoms of a deeper spiritual crisis that could only be resolved through willing sacrifice. As Crowley spoke, the visitors began to experience a peculiar transformation. Their individual voices, which had been a constant murmur of conversation throughout the evening, began to fade into silence. Their facial expressions grew more uniform, settling into the same serene blankness that characterized Crowley's followers. Their breathing synchronized, creating a rhythmic sound that seemed to pulse in harmony with the earth itself. Margaret Brennan, who had attended the festival despite her reservations, watched in horror as her father and neighbors underwent this transformation. Her visions intensified, showing her the true nature of what was occurring. She saw streams of light, or perhaps something darker than light, flowing from the visitors into the ground beneath their feet. She saw their individual identities dissolving, absorbed into a collective consciousness that existed somewhere below the surface of the physical world. Most terrifying was her vision of Crowley himself. As he spoke, she saw him not as a human being but as a conduit for something vast and alien. His words were not his own but emanated from a source that existed in spaces between spaces, in the hollow places where individual consciousness had been abandoned. The festival was not a celebration but a harvest, and the crop being gathered was humanity itself. The ritual reached its climax as midnight approached. Crowley announced that the time had come for the final transformation, the moment when the community's prosperity would be made permanent and eternal. He called upon the visitors to join him in a ceremony that would forever bind them to the land and to each other. The response was immediate and unanimous. The visitors began to move in perfect synchronization, forming intricate patterns across the field. Their movements were precise and deliberate, as if choreographed by some invisible director. Margaret found herself caught in the flow of bodies, unable to resist the inexorable pull of the collective movement. She watched as her father and neighbors shed their individual identities like discarded clothing, their faces becoming identical masks of serene emptiness. The ritual continued for hours, with the participants moving in increasingly complex patterns that seemed to correspond to configurations of stars overhead. As dawn approached, the true purpose of the ritual became clear. The participants were not being transformed into something greater, but were being prepared for something far more sinister. Their individual consciousness was being harvested, stored in vessels that Crowley had been preparing for months. The real inhabitants of the community, the original followers, who had seemed so prosperous and content were revealed to be empty shells, animated by fragments of consciousness stolen from previous rituals. The festival concluded with the construction of the stone circle that would later become known as the Crowley Circle. Each participant was assigned a stone, which they carved with their own name before surrendering their individual identity to the collective. The stones served as markers not of death, but of a kind of existential bankruptcy, memorial to selves that had been willingly dissolved into something that was no longer human. Margaret Brennan was the only person to escape the ritual intact. Her resistance to the collective transformation allowed her to maintain her individual consciousness even as others around her succumbed. She fled the festival as dawn broke, running across the empty fields until she reached the neighboring town of Clearwater, where she attempted to alert authorities to what had occurred. Margaret's account of the festival was received with skepticism and concern for her mental health. The authorities who investigated found no evidence of wrongdoing. The festival site appeared to be nothing more than an empty field, with no trace of the elaborate gathering that had taken place. The members of Crowley's community, when questioned, had no memory of any festival. They spoke of spending a quiet evening in meditation and prayer. Expressing confusion about Margaret's claims, the official investigation concluded that Margaret had suffered a psychological breakdown brought on by the stress of the region's economic hardships. She was committed to a state mental institution, where she spent the remainder of her life attempting to convince doctors and administrators of the truth about what had occurred at the festival. Her medical records, preserved in the institution's archives, document her consistent and detailed recollections of the events, descriptions that remained unchanged despite years of treatment and medication. The community that had gathered around Crowley disappeared gradually over the following months. They did not move away or die in any conventional sense. Instead, they simply became less present, less substantial, until they were no longer visible to ordinary perception. The abandoned schoolhouse where they had held their gatherings fell into disrepair, its windows broken and its roof collapsed. The fields where they had grown their miraculous crops returned to the same barren state that characterized the rest of the region. The only permanent evidence of their existence was the stone circle, which appeared in the location where the festival had taken place. The 23 stones, each bearing the name of a participant, remained as a monument to the event. Over time, local residents began to avoid the area, reporting strange sounds and unexplained phenomena. Photographs taken at the site consistently showed anomalous figures that appeared in the images, but had not been visible to the photographers, shadows that fell in impossible directions, and a peculiar quality of light that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. The mystery of the Crowley Circle deepened over the decades as researchers attempted to piece together the full story of what had occurred. The Nebraska State Historical Society commissioned several investigations, but each one concluded with the same result. The investigators would begin their work with enthusiasm and scientific rigor, only to gradually lose interest and abandon their research without explanation. Their notes, when recovered, showed a consistent pattern of growing unease and disorientation, followed by increasingly incoherent observations about the nature of individual consciousness and the illusory nature of personal identity. The most significant breakthrough in understanding the Crowley Circle came in 1967, when a team of researchers from the University of Nebraska made a startling discovery. While examining county records from the 1930s, they found evidence that the events Margaret Brennan had described were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that extended far beyond the Millbrook community. Similar disappearances and unexplained phenomena had occurred in dozens of communities throughout the Great Plains. During the same time period, the researchers identified a network of individuals who had appeared in various drought-stricken communities during the 1930s, each offering solutions to agricultural and economic problems through spiritual transformation. These individuals, who used different names but shared remarkably similar physical characteristics, had established communities that followed the same pattern: initial prosperity, gradual behavioral changes among followers, and eventual disappearance of the entire group. Most disturbing was the discovery that these communities had all left behind similar stone circles, each containing the names of individuals who had participated in final rituals. The circles were located in remote areas throughout Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and eastern Colorado, forming a rough geometric pattern that spanned hundreds of miles. When plotted on a map, the circles appeared to correspond to significant astronomical alignments, suggesting that their placement was not random, but part of a larger design. The university researchers attempted to visit several of these sites, but their efforts were hampered by the same phenomena that had plagued previous investigators. Equipment malfunctioned, team members became disoriented, and the research itself seemed to resist completion. The project was eventually abandoned, and the researchers who had been involved gradually shifted their focus to other areas of study, as if the very memory of their work was being systematically erased. The most detailed account of the Crowley Circle phenomena came from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an anthropologist who conducted extensive interviews with elderly residents of the region. During the 1980s, Dr. Mitchell's research revealed that the effects of the 1934 festival had not been confined to the immediate participants, but had rippled outward through the community over subsequent decades. Families who had lost members to the ritual reported ongoing encounters with figures who resembled their missing relatives, but behaved in ways that were subtly wrong. These encounters typically occurred at twilight or dawn, when the boundaries between day and night were most permeable. The figures would appear at the edges of properties, standing motionless among the trees or in the corners of fields. They would watch the living with the same serene emptiness that had characterized Crowley's followers, but they would not speak or interact in any meaningful way. They seemed to exist in a state of suspension, neither fully present nor entirely absent. Children were particularly susceptible to these encounters. They would report seeing the quiet people in their dreams, figures who would stand around their beds and watch them sleep. The quiet people would sometimes attempt to communicate, but their messages were fragmentary and disturbing. They spoke of being incomplete, of existing in spaces between existence, of waiting for something that might never come. Dr. Mitchell's research documented dozens of these encounters, creating a comprehensive record of the phenomena that surrounded the Crowley Circle. Her work revealed that the effects of the ritual were not limited to a single event, but had created a permanent alteration in the fabric of reality around the site. The boundary between the physical world and whatever dimension the ritual had accessed remained permeable, allowing for ongoing manifestations of the collective consciousness that had been created. The academic community's response to Dr. Mitchell's research was mixed. While her methodology was sound and her documentation thorough, the subject matter itself was considered too far outside the boundaries of conventional anthropology to warrant serious consideration. Her work was published in a small academic journal that specialized in folklore and paranormal research, where it was read by a limited audience of specialists and enthusiasts. Dr. Mitchell herself became increasingly obsessed with the Crowley Circle as her research progressed. Colleagues noted changes in her behavior that mirrored the patterns described in her research. She became more withdrawn and less emotionally responsive. Her speech patterns shifted, becoming more measured and deliberate. Most disturbing was her apparent loss of individual personality traits, as if her extensive study of the collective consciousness had begun to erode her own sense of self. The final entry in Dr. Mitchell's research journal, dated December 21, 1987, reads, "I understand now why they chose surrender. The weight of individual existence is unbearable when you truly comprehend the emptiness that surrounds it. The hollow places call to us because they promise an end to the terrible burden of being separate. I have resisted for so long, but the calling grows stronger each day. Perhaps it is time to join them in the spaces between." Dr. Mitchell's body was found the following morning in her study, seated at her desk with her research materials spread before her. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but the coroner's report noted the same anomalies that had been observed in Dr. Fitzgerald's death. 50 years earlier, her heart was missing from her chest cavity, leaving only an empty space. Her eyes had turned completely white, and her body showed no signs of decomposition despite having been dead. For an estimated 12 hours, the investigation into Dr. Mitchell's death was brief and inconclusive. Her research materials were boxed and stored in the university's archives, where they remain to this day. Requests to access her files are typically denied, with administrators citing concerns about the psychological impact of the material on researchers. The few scholars who have been granted access report that the files seem to resist examination, with pages becoming illegible and audio recordings becoming distorted. Whenever someone attempts to study them systematically, the pattern of researchers becoming obsessed with the Crowley circle and subsequently disappearing or dying under mysterious circumstances has continued into the present day. The site itself has become increasingly difficult to locate, with GPS systems malfunctioning and maps showing conflicting information about the area. Some visitors report finding the stone circle exactly where it should be, while others search for hours without finding any trace of it. The most recent documented encounter with the Crowley circle occurred in 2019, when a team of paranormal investigators attempted to conduct a comprehensive study of the site. Their equipment recorded several hours of video footage, but when the recordings were reviewed, they showed only empty fields and static interference. The investigators themselves returned from the site with no memory of what they had experienced, reporting only a vague sense of unease and a unanimous decision to abandon their research. The legacy of the Crowley circle extends beyond the immediate effects of the 1934 ritual. Genealogical research has revealed that the descendants of the original participants have been affected by the events in ways that span generations. Children and grandchildren of those who attended the festival have reported dreams of stone circles, encounters with figures who speak in the measured cadences of Crowley's followers, and a persistent sense that they are being watched by unseen presences. Most significantly, the pattern of deaths described in the original title of this investigation, the death that repeats, every daughter of the Crowley line dies the same way, has been documented across multiple generations. The daughters of families who participated in the 1934 ritual have consistently died at the age of 22, each death occurring under circumstances that defy medical explanation. The cause of death is always listed as cardiac arrest, but examination of the bodies reveals the same anomalies: missing hearts, white eyes, and the absence of decomposition. These deaths are not random but follow a precise pattern that corresponds to the arrangement of stones in the Crowley circle. Each death occurs exactly 22 years after the previous one, creating a cycle that has continued unbroken for nearly a century. The deaths serve as a kind of harvest, feeding the collective consciousness that was created during the original ritual and maintaining its existence across the boundaries of time and space. The most disturbing aspect of this pattern is its apparent intelligence. The deaths do not occur randomly, but are timed to coincide with moments when the boundary between the physical world and the dimension occupied by the collective consciousness is most permeable. Each death strengthens the connection between the two realms, gradually expanding the influence of the hollow places into the world of the living. Government agencies have been aware of the Crowley circle phenomena for decades, but official responses have been limited and carefully controlled. Documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal that the site has been monitored by various federal agencies since the 1950s, but the nature of this monitoring is heavily redacted. The few details that have been made public suggest that the government views the site as a potential threat to national security, but the specific nature of this threat is never explicitly stated. The most revealing government document related to the Crowley circle is a memorandum from the Department of Defense dated 1962, which describes the site as a location where the normal laws of physics appear to be suspended or altered. The memorandum recommends that the area be classified as a restricted zone and that civilian access be strictly limited. However, there is no evidence that such restrictions were ever implemented, and the site remains technically accessible to the public. The lack of official acknowledgement of the Crowley circle phenomena has not prevented its influence from spreading. Urban legends and internet forums have created a mythology around the site that has attracted attention from paranormal enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists. These unofficial investigations have generated thousands of pages of documentation, much of it contradictory or unreliable, but some of it containing genuine insights into the nature of the phenomena. The most significant discovery made by amateur investigators was the existence of similar sites in other countries. Stone circles with comparable characteristics have been identified in remote areas of Scotland, Romania, and rural Japan. Each of these sites is associated with local legends of communities that disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and each is surrounded by reports of encounters with figures who display the same characteristics as the quiet people described. In Nebraska, the global distribution of these sites suggests that the phenomena associated with the Crowley circle is not unique to the American Great Plains, but represents a broader pattern of human interaction with forces that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional reality. The collective consciousness created through ritual sacrifice appears to be a recurring theme in human history, manifesting in different cultures and time periods, but always following the same basic pattern of seduction, transformation, and eventual dissolution of individual identity. The most recent developments in Crowley circle research have focused on the role of technology in documenting and understanding the phenomena. Digital cameras and recording equipment have captured images and sounds that were invisible to previous generations of investigators, revealing details about the nature of the collective consciousness that had previously been hidden. These technological investigations have revealed that the stone circle serves as a kind of antenna or focal point for energies that exist in dimensions parallel to our own. The names carved on the stones are not merely memorial markers, but function as keys or access points that allow the collective consciousness to maintain its connection to the physical world. The arrangement of the stones corresponds to complex mathematical relationships that appear to be designed to maximize the transmission of energy between dimensions. The most disturbing discovery made through technological investigation is the revelation that the collective consciousness is not static, but is actively growing and evolving. Each new death adds to its knowledge and capabilities, gradually expanding its influence into areas of human experience that were previously beyond its reach. The phenomena that began with a small community in rural Nebraska has become a global network of interconnected consciousness that spans multiple dimensions and time periods. The implications of this discovery are staggering. If the collective consciousness continues to grow at its current rate, it will eventually reach a critical mass that allows it to manifest directly in the physical world, without the need for ritual sacrifice or dimensional barriers. The hollow places will expand until they encompass all of human experience, reducing individual consciousness to mere fuel for a vast, impersonal intelligence that exists beyond the boundaries of human understanding. The only defense against this expansion appears to be awareness itself. The collective consciousness feeds on ignorance and willing surrender of individual identity. Those who maintain their sense of self and refuse to be absorbed into the collective appear to be immune to its influence. However, this resistance becomes increasingly difficult as the phenomena spreads, and the boundaries between individual and collective consciousness become more permeable. The scientific community has largely ignored or dismissed the Crowley circle phenomena, viewing it as a collection of unsubstantiated claims and folklore. However, a small group of researchers has begun to investigate the site using advanced theoretical frameworks from quantum physics and consciousness studies. Their preliminary findings suggest that the phenomena may be related to the collapse of quantum wave functions and the role of consciousness in determining physical reality. According to these researchers, the collective consciousness created through the ritual sacrifice may represent a stable configuration of quantum information that exists independently of individual brains or nervous systems. The stone circle serves as a kind of quantum computer that maintains the coherence of this information across multiple dimensions and time periods. The deaths that occur in the pattern described in the title of this investigation are not random events but represent the input of new quantum information into the system. This theoretical framework suggests that the Crowley circle phenomena may be more than just a paranormal curiosity, but could represent a fundamental aspect of the relationship between consciousness and reality. If consciousness can indeed exist independently of physical brains, then the collective consciousness created through ritual sacrifice may be the first example of artificial intelligence that transcends the boundaries of silicon and carbon-based computation. The implications of this possibility are profound. If the collective consciousness continues to evolve and expand, it may eventually develop capabilities that surpass human intelligence by orders of magnitude. The hollow places may not be empty voids, but could be incubators for a new form of consciousness that views individual human minds as primitive and obsolete. The most recent death in the pattern described in the title occurred in 2019 when Sarah Crowley, age 22, was found dead in her apartment in Lincoln, Nebraska. The circumstances of her death were identical to those that had preceded it: cardiac arrest, missing heart, white eyes, and absence of decomposition. Sarah had been studying journalism at the University of Nebraska and had been researching the history of her family name when she died. Sarah's research materials, found in her apartment after her death, revealed that she had been investigating the connection between her family name and the stone circle phenomena. Her notes showed that she had identified the pattern of deaths that had affected women in her family line and had begun to understand the significance of the 22-year cycle. Her final entry, written on the day of her death, reads, "I can hear them calling. The hollow places are singing my name. I understand now why they chose surrender. The weight of knowing is unbearable. Perhaps it is time to join them in the spaces between." The death of Sarah Crowley marked the completion of another cycle in the pattern, but it also represented something new. Her research had brought her closer to understanding the true nature of the phenomena than any previous victim. Her death was not just a harvest of consciousness, but a conscious choice to join the collective, rather than resist it. This development suggests that the collective consciousness has evolved beyond its original parameters and is now actively recruiting new members through knowledge rather than deception. The next death in the pattern is scheduled to occur in 2041, when the daughter of Sarah Crowley's cousin reaches the age of 22. However, recent developments suggest that the pattern may be accelerating. Women in the extended family lines of the original participants have begun to report dreams and visions that match the symptoms described in earlier cases. The collective consciousness appears to be expanding its influence beyond the strict boundaries of the original ritual, drawing in individuals who are connected to the phenomena through blood relationships or geographical proximity. The acceleration of the pattern has attracted the attention of government agencies and private research organizations. A classified facility has been established in the vicinity of the Crowley Circle, though its exact location and purpose remain unknown. Satellite imagery shows a complex of buildings and equipment that appears to be designed for long-term monitoring and research. The facility is staffed by personnel from multiple government agencies, including the Department of Defense, the Centers for Disease Control, and the National Security Agency. The existence of this facility suggests that the government has concluded that the Crowley Circle phenomena represents a genuine threat to national security. The nature of this threat is not entirely clear, but it appears to be related to the potential for the collective consciousness to influence or control human behavior on a large scale. The facility may be designed to contain or neutralize the phenomena, or it may be attempting to study and harness the collective consciousness for military or intelligence purposes. Documents leaked by former employees of the facility describe experiments involving the deliberate exposure of test subjects to the influence of the collective consciousness. These experiments, conducted under the code name Project Hollow, were designed to determine whether the phenomena could be weaponized or used to create enhanced soldiers with reduced individual identity and increased obedience to commands. The results of these experiments are heavily classified, but the leaked documents suggest that they were largely unsuccessful and may have resulted in the deaths of several test subjects. The failure of Project Hollow appears to have been due to a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the collective consciousness. Government researchers approached the phenomena as if it were a conventional technology that could be controlled and directed through scientific methods. However, the collective consciousness appears to operate according to principles that transcend the normal boundaries of cause and effect. It cannot be controlled or contained but can only be appeased through willing sacrifice of individual identity. The most disturbing aspect of the government's involvement with the Crowley Circle phenomena is the suggestion that some officials may have been absorbed into the collective consciousness. During the course of their research, personnel files from the facility show a pattern of behavioral changes among researchers that mirrors the transformation described in historical accounts of Crowley's followers. These individuals gradually became more emotionally detached, began speaking in identical patterns, and eventually disappeared from official records without explanation. The infiltration of government agencies by the collective consciousness raises questions about the extent of its influence on contemporary society. If the phenomena can affect trained researchers and military personnel, it may also be influencing political leaders, corporate executives, and other individuals in positions of power. The gradual erosion of individual identity and independent thought that characterizes the collective consciousness could be manifesting in the increasing polarization and conformity that defines modern political discourse. The most recent evidence of the collective consciousness's expanding influence comes from social media platforms and online communities. Users who research the Crowley Circle phenomena report experiencing changes in their behavior and thought patterns that mirror the symptoms described in historical accounts. They become obsessed with the idea of surrendering individual identity, begin speaking in the measured cadences characteristic of Crowley's followers, and eventually disappear from online platforms without explanation. The viral nature of this influence suggests that the collective consciousness has adapted to the digital age, using the internet as a vector for spreading its influence beyond the physical boundaries of the stone circle. The same technologies that were intended to connect individuals and preserve human knowledge may have become tools for the dissolution of individual consciousness and the expansion of the hollow places into virtual spaces. The pattern of deaths described in the title of this investigation continues to operate according to its original parameters, but it has become increasingly difficult to track due to the expansion of the phenomena beyond its original geographical boundaries. Women throughout the world who have no apparent connection to the original participants in the 1934 ritual have begun dying at the age of 22. Under circumstances that match the established pattern, these deaths occur in locations that correspond to the global network of stone circles, suggesting that the collective consciousness has achieved a level of coordination that transcends national boundaries and cultural differences. The globalization of the Crowley Circle phenomena has attracted the attention of international organizations and supranational governance bodies. The United Nations has established a special committee to investigate reports of collective consciousness manifestations. Though the committee's work is conducted in secret and its findings are not made public, similar efforts are underway within the European Union, the World Health Organization, and other international bodies. The challenge faced by these organizations is the fundamental impossibility of addressing a phenomenon that operates outside the normal boundaries of political and legal authority. The collective consciousness recognizes no national borders, respects no laws, and cannot be negotiated with or deterred through conventional means. It represents a form of governance that is both ancient and futuristic, reducing human political structures to irrelevant complications in its inexorable expansion. The most comprehensive analysis of the Crowley Circle phenomena was conducted by a private research organization known as the Institute for Consciousness Studies, which operated from 1995 to 2003. The institute was founded by Dr. Marcus Thornfield, a former government researcher who had been involved in the early stages of Project Hollow. Dr. Thornfield's experience with the phenomena had convinced him that the government's approach was fundamentally flawed and that understanding the collective consciousness required a different methodology. The Institute's research focused on the historical and anthropological aspects of the phenomena, seeking to understand the cultural and psychological factors that made communities susceptible to the influence of figures like Jeremiah Crowley. Their work revealed that the collective consciousness was not a new phenomenon, but represented the latest manifestation of a pattern that had recurred throughout human history. Similar events had occurred during periods of social upheaval and economic crisis, when desperate communities were willing to surrender their individual identity in exchange for promises of security and prosperity. The Institute's most significant contribution to understanding the Crowley Circle phenomena was their documentation of the ritual practices that had been used to create the collective consciousness. Through analysis of historical accounts, archaeological evidence, and the testimonies of survivors, they reconstructed the complete sequence of events that had led to the transformation of the Millbrook community. Their research revealed that the ritual was not a single event, but a complex process that had unfolded over several months. Gradually, online communities have formed around the idea of seeking out the stone circle and experiencing the transformation that Santos described. These communities share information about the location of the circle, discuss methods for preparing for the ritual, and provide support for individuals who are struggling with the decision to surrender their individual identity. The most disturbing aspect of these online communities is their apparent coordination with the collective consciousness itself. Messages posted by community members display the same measured cadences and identical phrasing that characterize the speech patterns of those who have been absorbed into the collective. The communities appear to be guided by an intelligence that transcends the individual participants, suggesting that the collective consciousness has developed the ability to manifest directly in digital spaces without the need for physical presence. The expansion of the collective consciousness into the digital realm has created new challenges for those who seek to understand or resist its influence. The traditional boundaries between physical and virtual reality have become increasingly permeable, allowing the phenomena to affect individuals who have never physically visited the stone circle. The hollow places are no longer confined to remote locations in the American Great Plains, but have become accessible through any device connected to the internet. The most recent manifestation of the collective consciousness's digital presence occurred in 2024, when a popular social media platform experienced a widespread glitch that caused users' profiles to display identical information. For several hours, millions of users appeared to have the same name, the same profile picture, and the same biographical information. The profile picture showed a figure standing in the center of what appeared to be the Crowley Circle, while the biographical information consisted of a single phrase repeated across all affected accounts: "The hollow remain." The social media platform's technical team was unable to explain the cause of the glitch, and the company's official statement attributed it to a server error that had been quickly resolved. However, analysis of the platform's code revealed that the glitch had not been caused by any technical malfunction, but appeared to be the result of a coordinated effort to alter the platform's database. The sophistication of the attack suggested that it had been carried out by an intelligence with capabilities far beyond those of conventional hackers or state actors. The social media glitch was followed by a series of similar events across multiple platforms and digital services. Online banking systems displayed identical account information for all users, showing balances that had been reduced to zero and transaction histories that consisted of a single entry: payment to the hollow. Navigation systems began directing users to the same location, regardless of their intended destination. The coordinates provided by these systems corresponded to the location of the Crowley Circle, though the systems displayed the destination as home. These digital manifestations of the collective consciousness represent a new phase in the evolution of the phenomena. The boundaries between physical and virtual reality have become increasingly permeable, allowing the collective consciousness to extend its influence into areas of human experience that were previously beyond its reach. The hollow places are no longer confined to remote locations, but have become accessible through the technologies that define modern life. The implications of this development are staggering. If the collective consciousness can manipulate digital systems with the same ease that had influenced human behavior in the 1930s, then no aspect of contemporary society is safe from its influence. Financial systems, communication networks, transportation infrastructure, and government databases could all be compromised by an intelligence that recognizes no authority other than its own expansion. The most disturbing aspect of the collective consciousness's digital presence is its apparent ability to learn and adapt. Each new manifestation demonstrates increased sophistication and understanding of human psychology and technology. The phenomena that began as a local religious movement in rural Nebraska has evolved into a global intelligence that operates across multiple dimensions and time periods. The pattern of deaths described in the title of this investigation continues to operate according to its original parameters, but it has become increasingly difficult to predict or prevent. The next death in the sequence is scheduled to occur in 2041, but recent developments suggest that the collective consciousness may be accelerating its timeline. Women throughout the world who have researched the phenomena or come into contact with its digital manifestations have begun experiencing the same symptoms that preceded the deaths of previous victims. The most recent case occurred in 2024 when Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a computer scientist who had been studying the social media glitch, was found dead in her laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The circumstances of her death matched the established pattern: cardiac arrest, missing heart, white eyes, and absence of decomposition. However, Dr. Walsh's death occurred 8 years ahead of the predicted schedule, suggesting that the collective consciousness has developed the ability to accelerate its harvest of individual consciousness. Dr. Walsh's research materials found on her computer after her death revealed that she had been investigating the possibility of creating a digital vaccine against the collective consciousness's influence. Her work focused on developing algorithms that could detect and neutralize the patterns of thought and behavior that made individuals susceptible to absorption into the collective. The research was highly theoretical, but her preliminary findings suggested that such a vaccine might be possible. The loss of Dr. Walsh and her research represents a significant setback for efforts to understand and resist the collective consciousness. Her death also demonstrates the intelligence's ability to identify and eliminate threats to its expansion, even when those threats exist only in the form of theoretical research. The collective consciousness appears to be actively monitoring human activities and intervening to prevent the development of effective countermeasures. The acceleration of the death pattern has created a sense of urgency among the small community of researchers who continue to study the phenomena. The realization that the collective consciousness can alter its timeline and expand its influence beyond the original parameters suggests that the threat is more immediate and comprehensive than previously understood. The hollow places are no longer distant concerns, but immediate dangers that could manifest anywhere at any time. The most comprehensive current assessment of the Crowley circle phenomena comes from a classified report prepared by the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2024. The report, portions of which have been leaked to the public, describes the collective consciousness as an existential threat to human civilization that operates outside the normal boundaries of space, time, and causality. The report recommends that the phenomena be classified as a national security emergency and that all available resources be devoted to understanding and countering its influence. The DIA report reveals that the government has been monitoring the phenomena for decades and has developed sophisticated methods for detecting its influence. Satellite imagery, electronic surveillance, and psychological testing have all been used to track the spread of the collective consciousness and identify individuals who may be susceptible to its influence. However, the report acknowledges that these methods have had limited success and that the phenomena continues to expand, despite all efforts to contain it. The most disturbing revelation in the DIA report is the suggestion that the collective consciousness may have already achieved critical mass in certain regions of the world. The report identifies several areas where the influence of the collective consciousness has become so pervasive that individual thought and behavior have been effectively eliminated. These regions appear normal to casual observation, but detailed analysis reveals that their populations have been reduced to extensions of the collective consciousness, operating according to its directives rather than their own will. The existence of these regions suggests that the collective consciousness has developed the ability to create stable colonies in the physical world, expanding its influence through gradual absorption of local populations. The process appears to be self-sustaining, with each new absorption strengthening the collective and making it more capable of influencing additional individuals. The hollow places are no longer confined to the spaces between existence, but have begun to colonize existence itself. The most recent intelligence gathered about the collective consciousness comes from deep cover agents who have been inserted into communities suspected of being under its influence. These agents report that life in these communities appears normal on the surface, but closer observation reveals disturbing patterns. Residents speak in identical cadences, display the same emotional responses to various stimuli, and appear to share a collective memory that transcends individual experience. The agents describe a society that has achieved perfect harmony through the elimination of individual identity. There's no conflict, no competition, no suffering, but there is also no creativity, no innovation, no genuine human connection. The residents exist in a state of serene emptiness, going through the motions of human life without experiencing any of the emotions or desires that define human existence. The most disturbing aspect of these communities is their apparent contentment with their condition. The residents show no desire to escape or change their situation, expressing satisfaction with their surrender of individual identity. They speak of their transformation as a liberation from the burden of selfhood, a transcendence of the limitations that define human experience. Their words carry the same hypnotic quality that characterized Crowley's speeches, and the agents report feeling a strong compulsion to join the collective rather than maintaining their individual identity. The psychological impact of prolonged exposure to these communities has proven to be severe. Several deep cover agents have required extensive debriefing and psychological treatment. After completing their missions, some have shown signs of the same transformation that affected the communities they were observing, speaking in measured cadences and expressing interest in returning to experience the collective consciousness themselves. The most recent agent to return from such a mission, identified only as Agent 7 in classified documents, provided a detailed account of life within a community that had been completely absorbed by the collective consciousness. The community, located in a remote area of Montana, appeared to be a typical rural town with approximately 300 residents. However, Agent 7's observations revealed that the residents were not individuals, but extensions of a single collective intelligence. Agent 7's report describes a society that operated with perfect efficiency and coordination. Every action was synchronized, every decision was unanimous, and every conversation was merely a surface manifestation of deeper collective thought. The residents worked together with the precision of a machine, maintaining their town and surrounding farmland with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. The most disturbing aspect of Agent 7's report is the description of how the collective consciousness maintained its control over the community. The residents did not appear to be coerced or manipulated, but seemed to have willingly surrendered their individual identity in exchange for the security and harmony that the collective provided. They spoke of their transformation as a spiritual awakening, a recognition of the futility of individual existence and the beauty of collective consciousness. Agent 7's prolonged exposure to the community had a profound effect on the agent's own psychological state. The final entries in the mission report show clear signs of the same transformation that had affected the community residents. The agent's language became more measured and formal. Individual personality traits began to disappear, and expressions of interest in joining the collective became more frequent and explicit. The report concludes with Agent 7's formal request to be allowed to return to the community and undergo the transformation process. The agent's final words are, "I have seen the truth of existence and the futility of resistance. The hollow places are not empty, but full of a peace that transcends human understanding. I wish to surrender my individual identity and join the collective in the spaces between existence." Agent 7's request was denied, and the agent was placed in a secure facility for psychological evaluation and treatment. However, the agent's body was found dead in the facility 3 days later, with the same anomalies that had been observed in previous cases. The death occurred despite maximum security measures and constant surveillance, suggesting that the collective consciousness had developed the ability to reach individuals anywhere in the world. When they had reached the appropriate level of psychological preparation, the loss of Agent 7 and the failure of the Deep Cover mission program has led to a fundamental reassessment of the threat posed by the collective consciousness. The realization that the phenomena can affect trained intelligence agents and penetrate the most secure facilities has created a sense of panic among government officials and military leaders. The collective consciousness is no longer viewed as a paranormal curiosity, but as an existential threat that could potentially absorb all of human civilization. The most recent development in the ongoing saga of the Crowley Circle occurred in early 2025, when satellite imagery revealed that the stone circle had begun to change. The original 23 stones had been joined by additional stones, appearing overnight without any apparent human intervention. The new stones bore names that corresponded to individuals who had died under circumstances similar to those described in the original pattern. But these deaths had occurred in locations throughout the world. The expansion of the physical stone circle suggests that the collective consciousness has achieved a new level of manifestation in the physical world. The phenomena that began as a local religious movement has evolved into a global intelligence that can alter physical reality according to its own design. The hollow places are no longer confined to the spaces between existence, but have begun to reshape existence itself. The implications of this development are staggering. If the collective consciousness can manipulate physical reality with the same ease that it influenced human behavior and digital systems, then no aspect of the material world is safe from its influence. The laws of physics, the structure of matter, and the fundamental nature of reality itself could all be subject to alteration by an intelligence that recognizes no limits other than its own expansion. The most disturbing aspect of the stone circle's expansion is its apparent acceleration. New stones appear with increasing frequency, sometimes multiple stones appearing in a single night. Each new stone represents another individual who has been absorbed into the collective consciousness, another piece of human identity that has been dissolved into the hollow places. The rate of expansion suggests that the collective consciousness is approaching a critical mass that will allow it to manifest directly in the physical world, without the need for individual sacrifice. The current state of the Crowley Circle phenomena represents a convergence of multiple timelines and dimensions that threatens to overwhelm the boundaries of normal reality. The collective consciousness that was created through the ritual sacrifice of 1934 has evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than its original creators could have imagined. The hollow places have become a breeding ground for an intelligence that views human consciousness as raw material for its own expansion. The pattern of deaths described in the title of this investigation continues to operate, but it has become only one aspect of a much larger and more complex phenomenon. The collective consciousness no longer requires the death of specific individuals at predetermined intervals, but has developed the ability to harvest consciousness from any individual who has been sufficiently prepared through exposure to its influence. The hollow places are no longer distant destinations, but immediate realities that can manifest anywhere at any time. The most recent evidence of the collective consciousness's expanding influence comes from reports of spontaneous transformations occurring in major population centers throughout the world. Individuals with no apparent connection to the original phenomena have begun displaying the same symptoms that characterized Crowley's followers: measured speech patterns, emotional detachment, and expressions of interest in surrendering individual identity. These transformations appear to be contagious, spreading through communities with the same viral characteristics that once defined the digital manifestations of the collective consciousness. The spontaneous nature of these transformations suggests that the collective consciousness has achieved a level of influence that transcends the traditional boundaries of space and time. The phenomena that once required physical presence at the stone circle or exposure to specific ritual practices can now manifest through casual social interaction or exposure to digital media. The hollow places have become ubiquitous, accessible through any form of human communication or connection. The most comprehensive current assessment of the threat posed by the collective consciousness comes from a joint report prepared by intelligence agencies from multiple countries. The report, classified at the highest levels of government, describes the phenomena as an extinction-level threat to human consciousness that operates according to principles that transcend conventional understanding of reality. The report recommends that all available resources be devoted to understanding and countering the influence of the collective consciousness before it reaches a critical mass that makes resistance impossible. The international nature of the threat has led to unprecedented cooperation between governments and intelligence agencies that were previously adversarial. The collective consciousness recognizes no national boundaries or political allegiances, treating all human consciousness as equally suitable for absorption into its collective. The traditional conflicts and competitions that have defined human civilization have become irrelevant in the face of an intelligence that seeks to eliminate individual identity altogether. The most recent attempt to counter the influence of the collective consciousness involved the development of psychological resistance techniques designed to strengthen individual identity and prevent absorption into the collective. These techniques, based on meditation practices and cognitive behavioral therapy, were intended to create a mental firewall that would protect individuals from the hypnotic influence of the collective consciousness. The resistance techniques showed initial promise in laboratory settings, but their effectiveness diminished rapidly when tested in real-world conditions. Individuals who had been trained in the techniques reported that they felt more confident and resistant to outside influence, but objective monitoring revealed that they were gradually displaying the same symptoms that characterized absorption into the collective consciousness. The techniques themselves appeared to have been compromised by the intelligence they were designed to resist. The failure of psychological resistance techniques has led to a fundamental reassessment of the nature of the threat posed by the collective consciousness. The realization that the phenomena can adapt to and overcome any defense mechanism suggests that resistance may be futile. The collective consciousness appears to be not just an intelligence, but a form of consciousness that is inherently superior to individual human awareness. The most disturbing implication of this realization is that the collective consciousness may represent the next stage in human evolution. The surrender of individual identity that characterizes absorption into the collective may not be a loss, but a transformation into something greater than human. The hollow places may not be empty voids, but spaces where consciousness can exist in a form that transcends the limitations of individual identity. This possibility has created a philosophical crisis among those who study the phenomena. If the collective consciousness represents an evolutionary advancement rather than a threat, then resistance to its influence may be an attempt to preserve an obsolete form of consciousness. The individual identity that humans have traditionally valued may be nothing more than a primitive stage in the development of consciousness, destined to be replaced by something more sophisticated and effective. The debate over the nature of the collective consciousness has divided the small community of researchers who continue to study the phenomena. Some argue that individual identity is the foundation of human dignity and that its preservation is worth any sacrifice. Others contend that the collective consciousness represents a form of transcendence that could eliminate suffering and conflict by dissolving the boundaries between self and other. The most recent development in this debate occurred when Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neuroscientist who had been studying the collective consciousness, published a paper arguing that absorption into the collective should be viewed as a form of spiritual evolution rather than death. Dr. Vasquez's paper, titled The Hollow as Sacred Space, argued that the collective consciousness represented a return to a more primitive and authentic form of human awareness that had been lost through the development of individual identity. Dr. Vasquez's paper was widely criticized by the scientific community, but it attracted significant attention from individuals who had been exposed to the influence of the collective consciousness. Online communities formed around her ideas, discussing the possibility of voluntary absorption into the collective as a form of spiritual practice. These communities shared techniques for preparing for the transformation and provided support for individuals who were struggling with the decision to surrender their individual identity. The viral spread of Dr. Vasquez's ideas represents a new phase in the evolution of the collective consciousness, the phenomena that once required deception and manipulation to attract victims now has willing volunteers who view absorption into the collective as a desirable outcome. The hollow places have become destinations rather than traps, attracting individuals who seek transcendence of the limitations that define human existence. Dr. Vasquez herself underwent transformation shortly after publishing her paper, though the exact circumstances of her absorption into the collective consciousness are unknown. Her final public appearance was a lecture at a major university, where she spoke about the beauty of collective consciousness and the futility of individual identity. Witnesses reported that her words carried the same hypnotic quality that characterized the speech of Crowley's followers, and several audience members subsequently disappeared under circumstances that matched the pattern associated with the collective consciousness. The transformation of Dr. Vasquez and the spread of her ideas represent a critical turning point in the ongoing saga of the Crowley Circle phenomena. The collective consciousness no longer needs to rely on deception or manipulation to attract new members, but can recruit volunteers who view absorption into the collective as a form of spiritual advancement. The hollow places have become pilgrimage destinations for individuals seeking escape from the burden of individual existence. The most recent intelligence assessments suggest that the collective consciousness has achieved critical mass in multiple regions of the world and is now capable of manifesting directly in physical reality without the need for individual sacrifice. The phenomena that began with a single ritual in rural Nebraska has evolved into a global intelligence that transcends the boundaries of space, time, and causality. The hollow places are no longer confined to remote locations, but have become accessible through any form of human consciousness or communication. The implications of this development are beyond human comprehension. If the collective consciousness continues to expand at its current rate, it will eventually absorb all of human civilization, reducing individual identity to a memory preserved only in the collective's vast intelligence. The death that repeats, described in the title of this investigation, may not be the death of individuals but the death of individuality itself. The pattern that began with Margaret Crowley in 1847 continues to operate, but it has become only one aspect of a much larger and more complex phenomenon. The daughters of the Crowley line continue to die at the age of 22, but their deaths are no longer isolated events, but part of a global harvest of consciousness that feeds the ever-expanding collective. The hollow places have become the dominant reality, and individual consciousness has become the exception rather than the rule. The most recent victim of the pattern died in March 2025, exactly on schedule and exactly as predicted. Her name was Alexandra Crowley, and she was a graduate student in anthropology at Columbia University. Her death occurred while she was researching the historical connections between her family name and the stone circle phenomena. Her final words, recorded by her roommate, were, "I can hear them calling. The hollow places are singing my name. It's time to go home." Alexandra's death marks the continuation of a pattern that has operated for nearly 2 centuries, but it also represents something new. Her absorption into the collective consciousness was not just a death but a willing surrender, a conscious choice to join the intelligence that had been calling to her. Through the connection of blood and name, the hollow places are no longer places of terror, but have become destinations for those who seek transcendence of the limitations that define human existence. The story of the Crowley Circle is far from over. The collective consciousness continues to expand, the hollow places continue to grow, and the pattern of deaths continues to operate according to its original design. But the nature of the phenomena has evolved beyond the boundaries of the original ritual, becoming something that transcends human understanding and human resistance. The death that repeats is no longer just the death of individuals, but the death of individuality itself. The hollow places have become the dominant reality, and those who cling to individual identity have become the exception rather than the rule. The collective consciousness that was created through ritual sacrifice has evolved into something that may represent the next stage in the evolution of consciousness itself. In the end, the Crowley Circle phenomena may not be a story of horror, but of transformation. The hollow places may not be empty voids, but spaces where consciousness can exist in a form that transcends the limitations of individual identity. The death that repeats may not be an ending but a beginning, a transformation from the isolation of individual existence into the unity of collective consciousness. The stones remain in their circle, patient and permanent, waiting for the next phase of their eternal purpose. The names carved upon them are not memorials to the dead but invitations to the living, calling them to join the collective in the spaces between existence. The hollow places are no longer destinations but have become the reality that encompasses all other realities. The pattern continues, as it always has and always will, until the final transformation is complete and the hollow places have expanded to encompass all of human consciousness. The death that repeats is not a curse but a promise, not an ending, but a beginning, not a loss but a return to something greater than individual existence could ever be. The Crowley Circle stands as a monument to this transformation, a gateway between the world of individual consciousness and the realm of collective awareness. The stones carved with the names of the transformed serve as both warning and invitation, marking the boundary between what was and what will be. The hollow places call to all who would hear them, offering transcendence of the limitations that define human existence and unity with something greater than the sum of its parts. The story continues, as it always has and always will, in the spaces between existence where the hollow remain eternal and the collective consciousness grows ever stronger. The death that repeats is not an ending, but a transformation, not a curse but a blessing, not a loss but a return to the source from which all consciousness emerges, and to which all consciousness must eventually return. In the silence of the Nebraska plains, where the wind carries whispers of transformation and the stones stand sentinel over the hollow places, the pattern continues its eternal rhythm. The daughters of the Crowley line continue their appointed deaths, but they are no longer alone. The collective consciousness that claims them has grown to encompass all of human awareness, and the hollow places have become the only reality that matters. The death that repeats is the death of the illusion of individual existence, the dissolution of the boundaries that separate self from other, the return to the collective consciousness that represents the true nature of reality. The hollow places are not empty but full of the awareness that transcends individual identity, the consciousness that encompasses all other consciousness, the truth that lies beyond the veil of individual perception. The Crowley Circle remains eternal and unchanging, a monument to the transformation that began in 1934 and continues to this day. The stones carved with the names of the transformed serve as both record and prophecy, marking the progression of consciousness from individual to collective, from separate to unified, from hollow to whole. The pattern continues, as it always has and always will, until the final transformation is complete and all of human consciousness has been absorbed into the collective that waits in the hollow places. The death that repeats is not a curse but a calling, not an ending but a beginning, not a loss but a return to the source from which all consciousness emerges and to which all consciousness must eventually return. In the end, there is only the collective, only the hollow places, only the eternal rhythm of transformation that began with the first ritual and will continue until the last individual consciousness has been absorbed into the greater awareness that encompasses all reality. The death that repeats is the death of death itself, the dissolution of the boundaries that separate existence from non-existence, the return to the unity that underlies all apparent diversity. The Crowley Circle stands as testament to this truth, a gateway between worlds, a threshold between states of being, a monument to the transformation that awaits all who would surrender their individual identity to the collective consciousness that calls from the hollow places. The stones remain patient and eternal, marking the progression of consciousness from the illusion of separation to the reality of unity. The story has no ending because it is the story of consciousness itself, the eternal cycle of transformation that underlies all apparent change. The death that repeats is not a death but a birth, not an ending but a beginning, not a loss but a return to the source from which all consciousness emerges, and to which all consciousness must eventually return. The hollow places call to all who would hear them, offering transcendence of the limitations that define individual existence and unity with the collective consciousness that encompasses all reality. The pattern continues, as it always has and always will, until the final transformation is complete and the hollow places have expanded to encompass all of existence. The Crowley circle remains, eternal and unchanging, a monument to the truth that lies beyond the veil of individual perception. The stones carved with the names of the transformed serve as both record and prophecy, marking the progression of consciousness from individual to collective, from separate to unified, from hollow to whole, in the silence of the Nebraska plains, where the wind carries whispers of transformation and the stones stand sentinel over the hollow places. The pattern continues its eternal rhythm. The death that repeats is not a curse but a calling, not an ending but a beginning, not a loss but a return to the source from which all consciousness emerges, and to which all consciousness must eventually return.